welcome back in. Appreciate all of you hanging out with us. We are here in the Outkick studios, and you may not be having a great start to your morning, but I bet your morning is going a little bit better than Lance Taylor at the Lance Taylor 94.5 Jocks down in Birmingham. LT, you are going in for a colonoscopy. I appreciate you getting up early in the morning to come on with us. How would you assess your overall physical condition right now?
Oh, man, I hope I'm not too dehydrated. Yesterday was one of the worst days I've ever experienced in my life. And you hear, different stories about people that have done this before. And you feel like you'll be prepared, and they're probably embellishing a little bit and overstating things that happen. And I just can't tell you how miserable the last 24 hours have been. I mean, first of all, you can't eat anything, and you have to pound out this Miralax, I don't know, some kind of powder with all of this sugar-free Gatorade nonstop. And then you can imagine the results of it. And so I think I probably lost about 15 pounds yesterday.
I mean, a good thing would be you could make a fight. I mean, maybe you could give a better fight than Ben Askren did against Jake Paul. I know you stayed up. We advertised that quite a bit. I went to bed. I was thinking about ordering it. I think it was like $50. We advertised it a lot on this show. And then I was like, you know what? I'm tired. I don't know. I was following it along on Twitter, and there were all these different music performances and everything else. And I was like, I don't really want to be up until after midnight watching a fight that I don't care about at all. So I went to bed, and I didn't miss much.
Well, he is one of the most unlikable guys out there, Jake Paul is. And I'll give him credit. I mean, he's built, some kind of mini, empire as far as social media followings. But, my little guy was over, and so we were watching, and I know you like to do this with your
How old is your son now?
So he's 13, but I just introduced him to the Rocky franchise this weekend. So we watched Rocky 1, and, Rocky 1 is the critically acclaimed one, obviously won Best Picture in 1976, and I kind of explained to him, this one's about character development. It's going to be a little bit slower, but once we get to the fight at the end, then 2, 3, 4 are really going to explode, and it's a lot more action. So we watched 1. He was like, I liked it. So then we watched 2 and 3. Well, between 2 and 3, I started talking, hey, there's a real fight on the night. It's Jake Paul. I made the mistake saying you probably don't know who that is. Of course, Dad, I know who that is. Everybody
any
knows who
kid
Jake Paul is.
Who's on people, adults out there who don't realize how popular YouTube is. YouTube is, for whatever what was the most popular station when you were, kind of growing up in some way, like ESPN or MTV or whatever it is. YouTube is all of those rolled in together.
I was an 80s kid. I was an 80s kid, so MTV was gigantic. And the way I know how big YouTube is, I don't know any of these kids. But a lot of mornings I'll check out just celebrity birthdays just to see. And and I guess it's by Q-score. I don't know how they rank these guys. But like the other day, Thomas Jefferson, and I think you and I talked about this, he would have been like 218. He was like 11th. And 9 of the individuals in front of him were YouTube sensations or stars. And they were all
and you didn't know them.
From the ages of 15 to like 22. I didn't know any of them.
Yeah.
But this is what Jake Paul has done, and now he's become, I guess, a legitimate boxer.
I got to tell you this. I don't remember. So I've got a 13, a 10, and a 6-year-old. I cannot remember them ever sitting down and putting on the television without me being involved, with the exception of my 10-year-old who will put on Atlanta Braves games. Otherwise, like when we were kids, the television was on a lot. You would walk through, your parents might check and see what you're watching. My kids are on YouTube. I mean, when they wake up in the morning, first thing they do is go straight to YouTube, and it can be to check and see who won the night before, whatever sporting event was going on. It can be to, there's a variety of different things that they will dive into, but it's never, hey, like for me, when I was a kid, I would get up in the morning, eat my cereal while I'm watching SportsCenter on television, right? Like, hey, what happened the night before? I want to see the sports highlights. That was how I would start off the morning, and I imagine for a lot of you out there listening to me right now, that's the way that you would start off your morning when you were in school, or maybe some of you still do. None of the kids do it anymore. They get on YouTube if they have their own iPad, their phones, whatever it is, and check and see what happened the night before.
Yeah, I've only been on YouTube a couple of times. I'll pull some old highlights from something, and that's the easiest way to do it. But you're right. That's all my little guy watches is YouTube. He carries around an iPad, and he's on it all the time. And he's into cars as much as yours are into baseball. And so there's a guy named Doug DeMiro that's some kind of YouTube sensation, a guy in his, I think, 30s or 40s, and he just reviews cars all the time. And so my little guy just watches that nonstop. But the YouTube thing has exploded. I got baited, though. He told me, yeah, Dad, I don't like Jake Paul. Nobody likes Jake Paul. Let's see if he gets beat tonight. And I started to look at the odds, and he opened the day at -175, which blew me away. I didn't know much about Ben Askren, though, but I started to read up on him. National champion, I think two-time wrestling champion. I forgot where he wrestled, probably one of these Midwestern schools, Oklahoma State or something. And then, was a really good record in the UFC, but I didn't realize the guy had never boxed. But the numbers started to drop, and when I saw -175, I figured what's happening is this is going to be a fixed fight, and they're going to say that Jake Paul has finally beat somebody legitimate now after, Nate Robinson, now it's Ben Askren, and now you can get him. You can start to build more subscriptions on these pay-per-views. So I made the mistake of dropping $50. Not only that, as his number started to drop, I think it went down all the way to -145. So I jumped on Askren too. And then when I saw him skin up when he came out, I knew it was over. I knew he had not trained today.
Yeah.
And then I also read up quickly after I'd already placed my wager that he was getting $500,000 win or lose. So there was nothing at stake for him. And then obviously, I'm sure you've seen the highlights how the fight went. I mean, the Jake Paul guy looks like he probably can box. I would love to see him actually fight somebody that has some credibility. But that fight, I wasted $50 on the fight. I lost, too much money betting on Askren and basically wasted a night.
How much money
I think Snoop Dogg had $2 million on it. At least that's what he said in the commentary.
He was on Jake Paul or he was on Askren?
He was on Jake Paul. I mean, first of all, some of the worst language. And I'm one of these dads that I've kind of opened up because I remember when I was a teenager that I pretty much watched everything.
Yeah.
So, I've let, my little guy, one of his favorite movies is The Hangover. So I kind of let almost everything go. There are certain movies that I'll pull the trigger on or I won't allow him to watch. But when we were watching this, I mean, the commentary, Oscar De La Hoya was completely slammed out of his mind. But, I mean, it's Snoop Dogg and Too Short were just smoking the biggest blunts you could imagine, just right there on live TV, just cussing up nonstop, MFer. And it was so uncomfortable. But right after Jake Paul knocks him out, Snoop Dogg jumps up, MFer just won me $2 million. So I guess he had $2 million on Jake Paul. I don't know who would take a wager that big on something that I assume was fixed. But he said he had $2 million on it.
I watched the punch. I mean, Askren may not have trained very hard, and he may have gone into this fight without much of an impetus behind him. But that looked like a legit punch that floored him, right? Like, I mean,
it was a temple shot too. Yeah. So that's one of those that if that hits a legitimate fighter, I mean, we're not talking about somebody that's got a good chin. I mean, that was a temple shot. So I think that puts a lot of guys down. I just wonder if it was one of these. Hey, look, you're getting $500,000, and we want to make this so exciting. When you get hit flush, you go down. Just out of pride's sake, you can get back up and argue that the fight shouldn't be waived or whatever. That's just kind of what it looked like to me. But I agree with you. I mean, it was a legit punch.
I mean, I'm to the point now, having watched Jake Paul drop Nate Robinson like he did. I mean, Nate Robinson went to sleep, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
I mean, he wrecked Nate Robinson.
I mean, he hadn't been heard from since.
Yeah, I don't know where Nate Robinson is. And then he hit this dude pretty solidly too. I mean, initially it felt like it was kind of a crazy stunt, but I'm kind of curious now to see him actually box against somebody who is a professional boxer, right? Now, I don't mean like Floyd Mayweather or something crazy like that, but I mean, somebody who is full-time training to be a boxer, because he's waylaid a couple of people now.
Yeah, well, don't you think now that, I mean, look, your curiosity is peaked a little bit.
Peaked a little bit, yeah.
I'm saying, in the next 3 or 4 months, if he fights a guy that's got 11, 12 bouts under his belt, a guy that is actually a legitimate fighter, I mean, you probably would drop $50 or $60 to see it, right?
I think also it depends on what weekend it is, but we've had so much of a rush of sports as everything has tried to get caught up. We basically since June or July, when the NBA and the NHL started last year, it's been almost hard to catch your breath because everything has been sort of caught up in the we had the several months without sports. But I think you can start to look ahead. Like right now, it's pretty quiet. There's not that much going on until the NBA playoffs, to the extent those are going to matter, early rounds, NHL playoffs. I know we got the Kentucky Derby coming up in a little bit, but usually this is when the NHL and the NBA playoffs are underway. And I don't think the NBA playoffs start until like May 22nd-ish, and the same thing is the case for the NHL. And I know it's baseball, but it's early season baseball. So now is kind of a good time to slide in there if you've got a sporting event that you're trying to get some attention for.
Yeah, look, and if I'm Jake Paul and whoever's promoting him, I'm trying to get something in August because, August is going to hit right there where nothing's going on. So you could own a Saturday night in August. But I assume that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what exactly is going to end up happening.
Another amazing takeaway, Clay, from that thing, Pete Davidson, do you know who the comedian is? Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
He's dated both Kate Beckinsale and Ariana Grande, two of my complete favorites. I don't get it. He's a funny guy, but he is one of the strangest-looking guys ever. But he was kind of the host, kind of the go-to on this, just what was a complete cluster, but it was one of those train wrecks you couldn't take your eyes off of. But, he was basically dogging out Jake Paul and just talking about what a complete piece of garbage he was the entire time. And so, there was a comical side to that Jake Paul had this whole production around him, but the guy that actually hosted it just destroyed him the entire time.
I would like to be affiliated with a total ridiculousness that is these fights, right? Like if they've got Snoop Dogg smoking blunts, and I know Mario Lopez was there. They had just a whole collection of different people. You're talking about Pete Davidson. It just seems like such a carnival of absurd excess that it's kind of hard to look away, if that makes sense, even though I did look away and went to sleep instead of watching.
Yeah, Al Bernstein, I think, was there one credible, boxing commentator that was on there. I think De La Hoya was supposed to be that guy, but De La Hoya, again, I think he was drinking his own tequila nonstop. He was talking about what an idol Mike Tyson was fighting in his 50s, because now De La Hoya apparently came out last night, and he's about to set up some bouts. How much money? De La Hoya had more money than, it was Mayweather.
He owned his own. Yeah, I think that he owned the productions of all of his fights. He was, to his credit, and I think Mayweather kind of has followed the lead since, but these guys decided they didn't necessarily want the Don King of the world coming in and taking a huge cut of their checks when they are the ones who were promoting the fights. And so they were, I remember Mayweather, every T-shirt that got sold, he was making a piece of everything, right? Which, more power to him. They're the reason. But to me, you mentioned the gambling angle. Fights like these, if they can set gambling lines for them, given how rapidly gambling is moving around the country, to me, that would be fun to analyze from a gambling perspective, right? And if you could start to get a piece of some of the handle, or you've got an official sponsor in the sports gambling space, which has the exclusive right to hang lines in a certain way. I think there's a lot of demand just from a sheer entertainment perspective for things like this.
Well, I know a lot of people that are up in the Nashville area that, are using, your FanDuel and using that handheld app. And, these are a lot of millennials. And so they're very familiar with who Jake Paul is. So you just imagine how many $20, $30, $50, $100 plays were on that fight last night. But, I saw our friend Todd Furman kind of call it out before the fight, the legitimacy of, is this thing going to be a fixed fight? And I know Jake Paul has commented, at least he commented the day after on Sunday, took a shot at anybody saying it was a fixed fight because, as you said, you saw the punch, but at the same time, a guy can open himself up. But I just wonder, if you're FanDuel, if you're DraftKings, or if you're any major sports book, do you really expose yourself to a potential fight like that could be fixed?
Yeah, the answer would be, in general, and this is sort of the talking point that I would give for any of this, the best way to catch a unfair sporting event is to have as large of a gambling marketplace as possible, because they are the ones that catch people, right? All the match fixing that goes on, they can tell by the irregular betting patterns that come in. right? So if all of a sudden money floods in one particular direction, that's when they pull the line and they wave their hand and they say, hey, something's going on here. The fix may be in. So that would be a benefit, I think, of sports gambling becoming legal more places is it gets harder to fix a fight or to fix a sporting event in general because, sunshine really is the best disinfectant and the best sunshine is as many people wagering as possible.
Yeah, look, and I don't want to single out Askren, but a guy like that is done with his career that, hasn't made millions of dollars, that's, somebody like that is what you would fear because now we've seen this partnership, $1 billion partnership with the NFL, with DraftKings and FanDuel. And what I try to explain to people is back in the day when the NFL distanced themselves from Las Vegas and from any kind of sports gambling, it was because guys were making $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
And realistically, you could pay a guy to drop a pass or to blow coverage or to throw an interception in the flats. And those guys weren't making, $30 million a year. It's impossible to at least have these world-class athletes being involved in a fix.
Yeah, I think that's true because the money has gotten so large. Yeah, too much at stake. And again, the thing I would say is you can catch them in a way. The more regulated the betting market becomes, if anybody tried to do that, the abnormal betting patterns would stand out. Couple of other things that are out there. I don't know about you, but I love seeing full stadiums. And have you seen the highlights, like, for instance, at Mississippi State and Ole Miss, where they're just like, hey, COVID's over here. And they have monster huge college baseball stadiums filled. Nobody's wearing masks. I saw a funny quote from Tim Corbin, who's a national championship winning coach at Vanderbilt. He's like, COVID is over in Knoxville, basically, because they had a great baseball College World Series, 3-game series, not College World Series, but college baseball series. Tennessee, I think, is the number 3 team in the country, and Vanderbilt's number 2. And Vanderbilt went on the road in Knoxville, and Tennessee was just, it felt like it was almost completely full stadium. They had a pretty raucous environment. I love seeing these things and then picturing all the what I call the Corona Bros just kind of curling up in the fetal position and shivering, seeing how much fun. I don't know about you, but when I saw a home run hit into right field recently in Ole Miss, I tweeted it out, and everybody started throwing their beer, and it's like pandemonium in the right field. I was like, my God, that looks amazing.
Yeah, look, and I saw your tweet where you sent out that Ole Miss is actually drawing more than the Yankees this year.
Yes, and that's right.
Obviously, they're playing better too, but I think it is pretty awesome. And I just, during our show on Friday, this past Friday, I started to realize when we were talking about Alabama and Auburn spring games coming up that Alabama was going to set Bryant-Denny at half capacity.
Yeah, 47K went in for the Alabama spring game this weekend.
But I sort of think it's probably going to end up being the largest congregation of people we've had since the shutdown.
I think that's right. I think Alabama set a new record. I haven't seen any crowd bigger than 47,000 in a stadium in the United States since the March shutdown. Now, the Rangers, I believe, they were sold out-ish. They had like 40,000 roughly in the Texas Rangers Stadium. I think that was the biggest prior to the Alabama spring game. Which ended up with, I think they announced attendance at 47,000.
Yeah, look.
And if they were, let me ask you this: if they were pretend that the opener of Alabama is instead of being in September, pretend it is next week, this weekend coming up. It's the 24th. If they allowed it, is there any doubt in your mind that the Alabama stadium would be 100% full for the opener of the season?
Oh, not even that. Like, Alabama plays Mercer like deep in the schedule this year. I think in November they open up with Miami, but that's one of those neutral site games. But if they were to play Mercer in 2 weeks and it was legitimate the season opener, I think probably a get-in ticket's $150, $200.
People are so desperate to be in the crowd. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, we're already me and girlfriend are already lining up concerts for the summer. I'm just ready to get out and just get out to events, man. It's just been so long, and it is so refreshing to see.
All right, NFL draft is now, whatever the math is, 10 days or so from now, next Thursday. A lot of talk going back and forth. I don't know about you, but I love watching the gambling markets in the NFL draft. Mac Jones had become a pretty good favorite to be the San Francisco 49er pick at 3. then it now has swung back in the wake of his second pro day. Justin Fields is now favored to be the number 3 pick. You love college football like I do. You are also, like me, not a quarterback guru, brilliant analyst. But if you were looking and making a pick based on having watched pretty much every major game that Mac Jones has played like me, and pretty much having watched every major Justin Fields game like me that you have seen play, who would you take if you were the 49ers at 3 between those two? Because I think it's down to those two.
Yeah, look, I think it's a small sample size with Mac Jones, but I think I would go Mac Jones. And the only reason I say this, I go back and, I look at this Ryan Day system, and I go back to Dwayne Haskins, and the numbers were similar to what Justin Fields did.
Yeah.
And that's unfair to Justin Fields because I saw Justin Fields in a national semifinal game against pretty good defense at Clemson completely light that team up, and he did it in a variety of ways. So I think both these guys can be successful, but just one of the best deep balls I've ever seen thrown it was Mac Jones this past year, and it was so consistent. And, the guy's got a ton of confidence. And, again, it was a small sample size. And I know, ultimately you look at guys that, a Mark Sanchez, that was kind of the hit when he came out of USC. But you could still argue that Sanchez did have some success. I mean, he took the Jets to back-to-back AFC championship games. I know that was more so with that Buddy Ryan defense, or Rex Ryan defense, excuse me. But I think I would have to go Mac Jones. And it's amazing that that's become the biggest topic of debate for this draft, Clay.
Yeah.
Nobody's really talking about it. It's just Trevor Lawrence and
Zach Wilson,
Zach Wilson
are 1 and 2 locked in.
Yeah, and then it's, who's going to be the better quarterback? Is it going to be Justin Fields or is it going to be Mac Jones? And, it's a big call for Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch because I think San Francisco's got one of the best rosters in the NFL. I mean, just 2 years ago, I thought they were the best team in the NFL. I thought they should have won that Super Bowl. If they don't have a fourth-quarter meltdown, they do. They were just completely banged up. I mean, the injuries hit them harder than anyone in the NFL last year, but they're ready to win now. And, I think either one of these guys can have success, but this is just a big decision for those guys, and I ultimately think it's going to be Mac Jones.
You come back for a couple minutes with you because I want to ask you about Tua and Dwayne Haskins and how that could play into the debate. We're going to be talking about that some, I think, going forward. Dwayne Haskins already off of the team that drafted him, the Washington football team. Tua, not an illustrious, I think it's fair to say, debut for the Miami Dolphins. And what does that tell us? We'll discuss that a bit more when we come back with Lance Taylor as he gets ready